The air above Rome in the year 50 BCE was thick with more than just the dust of 1,000 chariots and the scent of roasting meat. It carried a palpable tension, a low hum of discontent that vibrated through the bustling forum, echoed in the narrow winding streets of the Subura, and settled like a shroud over the crowded insulor. Grain prices, usually a predictable ebb and flow, had been steadily climbing for months, tightening the noose around the necks of the city's plebeian masses. Lucius, a man whose hands bore the permanent stain of flour from his small bakery near the Porticus Aemilia, felt the pinch acutely. Each morning, as he kneaded dough before dawn, the worry gnawed at him. His wife, Octavia, a woman of sharp wit and even sharper tongue, tried to shield their 2 young children from the growing hardship, but the thinness of their gruel and the increasingly frequent arguments over dwindling coin were undeniable. "Another half sestertius for a measure of wheat, Lucius," Octavia exclaimed one evening, her voice a tight whisper to avoid waking the children. "At this rate, we'll be eating the plaster from the walls." Lucius sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. "The merchants say the shipments are delayed, the harvest poor, but I hear whispers, Octavia, whispers of warehouses overflowing, of men growing fat while Rome starves." These whispers often pointed towards the powerful, towards men like Senator Gaius Valerius. Valerius was a name whispered with reverence in the Senate House, and with quiet awe in the plebeian districts. He was a man of the old guard, a champion of traditional Roman virtues: pietas, devotion to gods and family; gravitas, a sense of dignity and seriousness; and fides, loyalty and trustworthiness. His speeches in the Forum, delivered in a booming, resonant voice, always spoke of Rome's glorious past, of the sanctity of her institutions, and the importance of civic duty. He had funded grand public works, rebuilt temples, and often distributed small sums to the poor, earning him a reputation as a benevolent patron. His villa on the Palatine was modest by senatorial standards, a testament, he claimed, to his disdain for ostentatious wealth. Yet, even as Valerius delivered impassioned orations on the virtues of frugality and the dangers of moral decay, his agents were quietly, meticulously, buying up vast quantities of grain from distant provinces. They diverted shipments, created artificial shortages, and manipulated market prices, all while Valerius publicly lamented the unforeseen challenges facing Rome's food supply. His true disdain was not for wealth, but for any obstacle to its acquisition. Meanwhile, in the sacred quiet of the House of the Vestals, a young woman named Aelia moved with a grace born of years of ritual. Her white robes, though simple, seemed to shimmer with an ethereal light in the dim corridors. Aelia was a Vestal Virgin, chosen in childhood, bound by a sacred vow of chastity for 30 years, her life dedicated to tending the eternal flame of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Her purity was not merely personal, it was believed to be inextricably linked to the well-being and prosperity of Rome itself. Should the flame falter or a Vestal break her vow, disaster would surely befall the Republic. Aelia, with her serious eyes and quiet demeanour, seemed the embodiment of the sacred trust placed upon her. She performed her duties with unwavering devotion, her days a cycle of prayer, tending the flame, and participating in solemn rituals. She was, in her own way, as much a symbol of Roman virtue as Senator Valerius, though her power was spiritual, not political. The two worlds, the bustling, hungry city and the serene sacred temple, seemed utterly separate, yet an unseen thread, spun from ambition and deceit, was already beginning to weave them together. Lucius, driven by the gnawing hunger in his children's eyes, could no longer simply listen to whispers. He began to investigate. During his deliveries to various taverns and markets, he subtly questioned other merchants, carters, and even the occasional slave. He learned of unusual nocturnal movements of wagons on the Appian Way, heavily laden and shrouded, bypassing the usual granaries. He heard tales of sudden unexplained wealth among certain minor officials who dealt with grain imports. Each piece of information was like a loose thread, tantalizing but not yet enough to unravel the whole cloth. His inquiries, however, did not go unnoticed. One evening, a burly man with a scarred face smelling of cheap wine and stale sweat blocked his path in a narrow alley. "Some questions are best left unasked, Baker," the man grunted, his hand resting menacingly on a short dagger at his belt. "Rome has many mouths, and not all are fed by bread. Lucius, though terrified, refused to be deterred. The image of Octavia's worried face and his children's hollow cheeks spurred him on. He knew he was treading dangerous ground, but the alternative was watching his family starve. He began to focus his suspicions on Valerius, not just because of the senator's public pronouncements contrasting with the private rumours, but because of the sheer scale of the operation he was uncovering. Only a man of immense power and influence could orchestrate such a widespread manipulation of the grain supply. Meanwhile, within the hallowed confines of the House of the Vestals, subtle anomalies began to surface. Aelia, ever observant, noticed them. The Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, and other high-ranking officials would occasionally visit the house for religious consultations with the Vestals, particularly the senior ones. But in recent months, Senator Valerius had become a frequent visitor, his visits often late in the evening, long after the city had settled into its fitful sleep. He claimed these were urgent consultations regarding omens and divine will, crucial for the Republic's stability in these turbulent times. Aelia, still young and relatively junior, was often present during these meetings, serving wine or preparing the sacred implements. She noticed the way Valerius's eyes lingered on her, a gaze that felt less like paternal piety and more like something unsettling. She dismissed it as a youthful imagination, a product of the cloistered life she led. Yet, a disquiet grew within her. She sometimes caught hushed words, not about omens, but about shipments and market fluctuations, quickly veiled when she approached. One morning, while sweeping the courtyard near the sacred grove, Aelia found something unusual. Tucked beneath a loose stone, almost as if hastily hidden, was a small, intricately carved signet ring. It depicted a coiled serpent entwined around an ear of wheat, a peculiar design she had never seen before. She recognized the quality of the gold, the meticulous craftsmanship. It was not the sort of trinket a common person would possess. She carefully picked it up, her fingers tracing the cold metal, a strange sense of foreboding washing over her. She decided to keep it, unsure why, but feeling a strange pull towards its mystery. The threads, one economic and one sacred, were drawing closer, unseen by most, but felt by those caught in their tightening coils. Lucius's persistence, coupled with a stroke of desperate luck, finally yielded a breakthrough. Through a former slave of a minor grain official, now working as a dock worker, he learned of a specific remote warehouse complex far beyond the city walls, near the old Via Latina. It was said to be owned by a shadowy consortium, but the dock worker had overheard hushed conversations linking it to the senator. One moonless night, Lucius, risking everything, ventured out. He found the warehouses vast and imposing, guarded by a few surly men. He observed for hours, noting the precise times of the heavily laden wagons arriving and departing, their contents clearly grain. He even managed to bribe a disgruntled guard with a few denarii and a promise of anonymity, learning that the consortium was merely a front for Valerius himself. The senator was not just manipulating prices. He was hoarding enough grain to feed a legion for months, waiting for the prices to skyrocket further before releasing it. The scale of the greed was staggering. As Lucius gathered this damning evidence, the sacred thread also began to unravel. A junior Vestal, a timid girl named Lyra, had been deeply troubled by Aelia's increasingly withdrawn demeanour and the unsettling frequency of Valerius's consultations. Lyra had once accidentally overheard a fragment of a conversation between Valerius and Aelia, words that had nothing to do with omens, but rather a tender, almost possessive tone from the senator, and a hesitant, almost fearful response from Aelia. Lyra, terrified but compelled by her conscience and the sanctity of their vows, confided in an elderly respected temple servant, a woman named Lena, who had seen much in her long years. Lena, with her keen eye for human nature, had also observed Valerius's visits. She had noticed the subtle shift in Aelia's posture, the way she would flinch almost imperceptibly when Valerius's hand would briefly touch her arm under the guise of a blessing. Lena, though loyal to the Vestals, was also deeply loyal to Rome and its traditions. She knew the gravity of a Vestal's broken vow. The signet ring Aelia had found, which Aelia had shown Lena in a moment of confused trust, was the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. Lena recognized the serpent and wheat motif. It was the personal signet of Gaius Valerius, a design unique to his family, symbolizing his supposed connection to the land and prosperity. The two threads, one economic and one sacred, now converged into a single, monstrous knot. Lena, armed with the knowledge of the signet ring and Lyra's testimony, knew she had to act. She sought out Tribune Marcus, a man known for his integrity, even if he was sometimes slow to anger. Marcus, a pragmatic and cautious man, initially dismissed Lena's claims as the ramblings of an old woman and a frightened girl. Senator Valerius, a Vestal, impossible, he is a pillar of Rome, he scoffed. But Lena, with quiet dignity, placed the signet ring on his desk. This was found near the Sacred Grove Tribune. Aelia found it. It belongs to Senator Valerius. And the girl, Aelia, she has been seen in his company late at night, under circumstances that defy explanation for a Vestal. Marcus's skepticism wavered. He knew Valerius's reputation, but he also knew the unyielding sanctity of the Vestal vows. He sent his own trusted agents to discreetly observe Valerius. What they uncovered, independently, corroborated Lucius's findings. Valerius was indeed the architect of the grain shortage, his hidden warehouses overflowing. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Valerius was using his public image as a pious, traditional Roman to mask not only a vast exploitative grain hoarding scheme, but also a sacrilegious affair with Aelia, the Vestal Virgin, whom he had manipulated and seduced under the guise of sacred consultations. The late-night visits to the house of the Vestals were not for omens, but for clandestine meetings, violating the very core of Roman religious and moral law. The signet ring, likely dropped in haste during one of these illicit encounters, was the irrefutable link. The revelation was a hammer blow to Marcus. A revered senator, a Vestal Virgin, and the manipulation of Rome's food supply. It was a trifecta of betrayal that threatened to tear the very fabric of the Republic apart. The news, once confirmed by Tribune Marcus, could not be contained. It leaked perhaps through a junior clerk in the Tribune's office, perhaps through Lucius, who, emboldened by his own discoveries, began to speak more openly to his fellow plebeians. What started as hushed whispers in the taverns and markets quickly erupted into shouts of disbelief, then cries of outrage. Valerius! The pious Valerius! A grain hoarder! And with a Vestal? By the gods, the sacrilege! The combination of economic exploitation and religious sacrilege was a potent, volatile mix. The Roman plebs, already suffering from hunger and resentment, felt a profound sense of betrayal. Valerius, their supposed champion of tradition, had not only profited from their suffering, but had defiled one of Rome's most sacred institutions. The very foundation of their belief system, the Pax Deorum, peace of the gods, maintained by the Vestals, felt threatened. Marcus, seeing the storm brewing, knew he had to act swiftly and decisively. He prepared to bring formal charges against Valerius before the Senate, hoping to channel the burgeoning public anger into legal proceedings rather than outright chaos. He sent word to the Pontifex Maximus, who, upon hearing the full damning evidence, was aghast. The fate of Aelia, the Vestal, was now a grave matter for the College of Pontiffs. Valerius, sensing the tide turning, attempted to suppress the truth. He dispatched his agents to threaten those who spoke out, spread counter-rumours, and even tried to bribe key senators. But it was too late. The dam had broken. The anger of the common people, fueled by hunger and moral outrage, was a force no amount of gold or intimidation could contain. The spark ignited on a sweltering afternoon in the Forum. A scheduled public demonstration over the escalating grain prices, organised by various plebeian associations, had already drawn a massive crowd. Orators, their voices hoarse, railed against the unseen forces manipulating the market. Then, a voice, perhaps Lucius's, or another desperate citizen, bellowed, "It is Valerius! Gaius Valerius, the pious fraud, who starves us and defiles our gods!" The name, once revered, now hung in the air like a curse. Someone else shouted, "He hoards the grain in warehouses beyond the Latina, and he lies with a Vestal." The murmurs swelled into a roar. Disbelief morphed into a collective incandescent fury. The crowd surged, no longer a mere demonstration but a seething, vengeful mob. Stones were thrown, benches were overturned. The Roman riot, a beast often slumbering but easily awakened, had stirred. The Forum erupted into a maelstrom of sound and fury. The shouts of the enraged plebs mingled with a crash of collapsing market stalls and the terrified screams of those caught in the sudden surge. The air, already thick with dust, now carried the acrid smell of fear and the metallic tang of nascent violence. "To Valerius's villa!" someone roared, and the cry was taken up by hundreds, then thousands. The mob, a living, breathing entity of collective rage, surged out of the Forum, a torrent of humanity spilling into the narrow streets leading to the Palatine Hill. Shops suspected of being connected to Valerius's network were the first targets. Their doors were smashed, their contents looted or destroyed. The City Watch, thin on the ground and unprepared for the sheer scale of the uprising, found themselves overwhelmed. Their attempts to restore order met with a hail of stones and curses. Valerius's villa, usually a beacon of quiet dignity, became the focal point of the mob's wrath. Gates were torn down, windows shattered, and the meticulously manicured gardens trampled underfoot. The senator, who had been preparing to flee, found himself trapped. His slaves, many of whom had suffered under his harsh rule, offered little resistance. Some even cheered on the destruction. Meanwhile, the Pontifex Maximus, acting with grim urgency, dispatched temple guards to the house of the Vestals. Aelia, her face pale with shock and shame, was taken into protective custody. The news of her involvement, though she had been manipulated, had spread like wildfire, and her very presence in the city was now a danger, both to herself and to the fragile peace. Her fate, according to ancient Roman law for a Vestal who broke her vow, was to be buried alive in the Campus Sceleratus, the field of wickedness. The Pontifex, however, saw the nuanced truth of her manipulation, and sought to spare her the ultimate horrific punishment. But her public life as a Vestal was undeniably over. Valerius, attempting to disguise himself, tried to slip out a back entrance of his burning villa. But the mob, fueled by a primal hunger for justice, had eyes everywhere. A baker, perhaps Lucius himself, recognized him. "There he is, the serpent!" The cry went up. The mob descended. Valerius was dragged from his hiding place, his pleas and curses drowned out by the roar of the crowd. He was not killed immediately, but beaten, humiliated, paraded through the streets, a living effigy of Rome's betrayed trust. The Senate, meeting in emergency session, was in chaos. Senators shouted over each other, some demanding immediate military intervention, others fearing that such a move would only escalate the violence. Tribune Marcus, standing firm amidst the pandemonium, argued for a different approach. "We must address the people's grievances, not merely suppress their anger. The grain must be released. Valerius must face justice." He used his tribunician veto to block any rash military action, knowing that bloodshed would only deepen the wounds. All through the night the fires burned, the shouts echoed, and the city of Rome, the eternal city, writhed in the throes of its own internal torment. The first rays of dawn, filtering through the smoke-laden air, revealed a Rome scarred but not broken. The riots, having exhausted their immediate fury, had begun to subside. The streets were littered with debris, the stench of burnt wood and spilled wine hung heavy, and the silence that followed the chaos was almost more unsettling than the noise itself. Valerius, battered and broken, was eventually seized by a detachment of the City Watch, acting under the direct orders of Tribune Marcus. He was not lynched, a testament to Marcus's desperate efforts to uphold some semblance of legal order amidst the anarchy. He was dragged before an emergency assembly, a hastily convened tribunal of senators and tribunes, his once booming voice reduced to a hoarse croak as he faced the charges of sacrilege, fraud, and treason against the Roman people. The evidence, meticulously gathered by Lucius and Lena and corroborated by Marcus's own investigations, was overwhelming. Valerius was condemned, his vast wealth confiscated and redistributed in part to the public granaries. His name was to be struck from all public records, a permanent stain on his family's lineage. He was exiled, stripped of all titles and property, sent to a desolate corner of the empire, a living ghost of his former power. Aelia's fate was more complex and perhaps more tragic. The Pontifex Maximus, after careful deliberation with the College of Pontiffs, ruled that while her vow had been broken, she had been manipulated and coerced by a man of immense power and deceit. She was not condemned to be buried alive. Instead, she was ritually stripped of her vestal robes, her sacred flame extinguished for her. She was exiled from Rome, forbidden to ever return, her life as a Vestal irrevocably ended, her purity forever tainted in the eyes of many. She left Rome a broken woman, a living testament to Valerius's depravity and the harsh, unforgiving nature of Roman justice, even in its mercy. The hidden grain, discovered in Valerius's warehouses, was immediately seized and released into the market. Prices stabilized, and the immediate threat of famine receded. Lucius and Octavia, like many others, found some relief. Their children would eat, and the fear in Octavia's eyes lessened. But the experience had etched itself onto their souls. Lucius, once a simple baker, had seen the raw power of the people and the corrupt heart of the elite. He would forever carry the memory of Rome ablaze, a city pushed to its breaking point. Tribune Marcus, weary but resolute, surveyed the damaged forum. The physical scars would heal, the buildings would be repaired, but the trust, once broken, would be far harder to mend. The scandal of Gaius Valerius, the serpent in the forum, served as a stark, brutal warning. It was a reminder that even the most revered figures could harbour the deepest corruption, that piety could be a mask for greed, and that the wrath of the Roman people, when pushed too far, was a force capable of shaking the very foundations of the Republic. Rome had survived, but it had been a near thing, a chilling glimpse into the fragility of order when justice was denied and virtue became a lie.